I'm excited about sharing with you today, and I would say this, that if the Bible's teachings could be boiled down into one simple phrase, here's what I think it would be: that God provides and Satan lies. I think that's it. I think in the Old Testament and New Testament, you just see this picture of God providing for his people. I think you see this picture of God providing for people who don't even belong to him yet. And I think you see this picture from the Old Testament and certainly into the New Testament of there being an enemy who wants to lie about the claims of God and wants to do something, he wants people to do something different than what God says. And he's a liar. Jesus said that Satan is the father of lies. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to see how Jesus compassionately showed gracious kindness towards needy people, while the religious leaders, who should be the first ones to recognize the Jewish Messiah, instead they gave into the lie, and just like Satan, they put Jesus to the test, just like Satan had done during the temptation. And then the question I hope that we're going to end with, that you'll receive and I'll receive, will be something like this: are we those who trust that God provides, or are we those who give in to Satan's lies? That's where we're going. And so to give you context from last week real quickly, we saw and asked this question I hope you've been chewing on, and that is this: are we hypocrites or are we his? Right? Are we those who we talk a good game like the Pharisees did? Remember what Jesus had said about them? He said, "You hypocrites." Isaiah was right when he prophesied, "You, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are" what? "Far from me, and their worship of me is only in vain." In other words, emptiness. It's a great talk, but it's no walk, right? Is that us, or are we those who actually are his? And we saw Jesus show incredible compassion, get this, for a Gentile woman, a non-Jewish woman, a Canaanite woman, who the Jews would have considered to be like an unclean dog. Jesus even refers to the Jews as God's children and the dogs, and referred to her. But then he so graciously and kindly responded to her request and healed her daughter from, actually kicked a demon out of her daughter's life, which is incredible. And then we again ask that question: are you a hypocrite or are you his? I hope you've chewed on that this week. Because here's the reality: the God that we serve, he knows my heart right now. He knows if what I'm saying is what I really believe, or if I'm just talking smack and it sounds good to people. He knows. And he knows right now whether you say you believe and it's legitimate, or whether you're his or where you're a hypocrite too. He knows that right now. So if we're just going to come clean before him, right? How about we go, "God, I've been living a hypocritical lifestyle. Help me to follow you and not talk a good game, but actually walk this with your help." And I hope that's where you're at today. And I hope you chewed on that question. Here's where we pick up today, Matthew chapter 15, verse 29. Here we go. "And Jesus left there," we'll talk about where there is in a second, "and went along the Sea of Galilee. And then he went up on the mountainside and he sat down. And great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them." Now, this story is already incredible. But you know what I think my tendency is, and maybe some of your tendency is, we read that and we're like, yeah, we've already heard Matthew. And Matthew said, yeah, Jesus healed blind people, and he healed crippled people, and he healed lame people, and he healed, those who were demon-possessed, and he healed people. Okay, cool. But here's the problem. The problem is, many of us, we don't stop and pause on that. In just a second, we're going to pause on that. But I want to give you the angle that Matthew doesn't give us. Mark does, but I think something that Matthew says ties in. It's very important. Here's what Mark says, this same situation, okay, the same story, the synoptics reading the text together. Here's what Mark chapter 7, verse 31 says. "And when Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon," which is what we saw last week with the Canaanite woman, that's where he was, "he went down to the Sea of Galilee," that's what Matthew says too, and then he adds this, he gives clarity to this, "into the region of the Decapolis." The Decapolis. Now, you remember we've used this map before, so a quick geography refresh, okay? The Sea of Galilee, Jesus lived, it became the home base for Jesus, Capernaum. That's where Jesus spent a lot of time. It's where Peter's house was. It's where he healed his mother-in-law, all those things, right? And then Jesus spent a lot of time around the north part, around the western part, but then the eastern part Jesus had gone to before. We saw this in Matthew. That's where Jesus went and cast he cast demons out of 2 men, remember, that called themselves Legion. He cast them into 2,000 pigs, and they ran off the hill. That happened at the Gadarenes, remember that? And I told you way back then, the Gadarenes is part of the Decapolis, and now Mark mentions the Decapolis. Decapolis is 10 cities, that's what it means. These 10 cities were primarily Gentile. They were not Jewish. We know this at the time, and we know this, one of the reasons we know this is there have been tons of statues of false and pagan gods that are there, including Zeus, and on it goes from the different gods that were part of that culture at that time. And so we get this account that's really cool that Mark gives, that Jesus now is in a Gentile region. So he left this Gentile lady, Canaanite, right? And he makes his move to the Sea of Galilee, but not just to go back to the Jews, evidently. He goes to a Gentile group of people. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now, with that said, look at what Mark says. Matthew doesn't tell us this part of the story. Mark does. I want you to see the personal touch of Jesus. Because it's easy to go, yeah, Jesus healed lame people, he healed blind people, he healed a bunch of people. But I want you to see this personal touch that Mark gives. And we'll come back to the text. Verse 32, Mark chapter 7. And there some people brought to him a man who was deaf and who could hardly talk. And they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. And after he took him aside, away from the crowd. Now you get this personal time with Jesus. He goes, hey, come with me. Let's spend a little bit of time together. Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears, and then he spit and touched the man's tongue. And you might go, that is gross. This guy wouldn't have thought it was gross when this happened. Watch this. And he looked up to heaven with a deep sigh, said to him, Ephatha, which is Aramaic, which means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosed, and he began to speak plainly. Wow. Look at this. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone. But the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. And people were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. Isn't that a cool personal touch that we get to see? And then Mark comes back to and transitions to the story that Matthew tells, that we're about to pick up in Matthew, about not just this individual, but about these great crowds. And here we go, Matthew chapter 15, verse 30. And great crowds came to him, bringing, here we go, the lame, the blind, the crippled, mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet. We already read this text. And he healed them. Watch this. And the people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. Now again, we've heard these stories so often, we can go, yeah, Jesus did that. But let me tell you how this gets personal. Here's how this gets personal. When suddenly we look at this, they were amazed, they saw the mute speaking, we go, I've got a friend who's unable to speak. If you say, I've got a family member who's unable to speak, what if it were you that did not have the ability to speak anymore? And Jesus says, you're healed. Speak. And they do. And they start talking, and you're like, now I wish I could get them to shut up. But you can't because they're talking. Wouldn't that be awesome? And then this, look, the mute were speaking, the crippled were made well. What's a crippled person? This could be part of their leg that's way shorter than the other, and they're hobbling everywhere they go. It could be feet that are messed up. It could be hand. We've seen Jesus heal people with messed up hands. These are people who probably can't do a whole lot of work on their own. They certainly can't work to the degree that other people could work. And Jesus touches them. Jesus speaks to them. Jesus heals them. And the crippled people, the drawn up people, walk away going, this is awesome. Let me ask you something. If that was our family member, our friend, or if that was you, do you think you might be a little bit excited about that? Yeah. How about this? And the lame went walking. The lame were those who were brought to Jesus because they couldn't get there themselves, and they lay these people at Jesus' feet. We've seen Jesus do this before. Can you imagine a person who hasn't walked in years? And you know what happens when you don't use muscles for years? It's not like if your skeletal structure suddenly is made right, you're good. You got muscles that have to keep those skeletal structure moving. And suddenly when Jesus says it, these lame people stand up and probably jump and probably scream out, and family members are going, yes! Can you imagine? And of course, the blind go seeing. Can you imagine if it were your grandfather, your grandmother, your mom, your dad, your child, you, and you've not for years, maybe because you saw at one point, now you can't, or maybe you've been blind your whole life, you haven't seen your own family, and you open your eyes for the first time and you see them. Is this amazing? And yet, many of us were like, yeah, he did that, I got it. And this one's so cool, watch this. Mark gave us the insight Matthew doesn't give us, but now I think this makes sense. It doesn't just say, and they praised God. When the Jews did this, they see stuff Jesus did, it said they praised God. But look at this. They praised the God of where? Israel. You've got Gentiles, mostly pagans, who don't follow the God of Israel. And when they see this happen, they don't praise their statues, right? They don't praise their false gods. They say, you know what? The God of Israel is among us. We see his power. How cool is that? I love this. I love this. Look at verse 32. And Jesus called his disciples to him and he said, I have compassion for these people. And they've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. We've already kind of seen some of the things they saw over those 3 days. What else would Jesus have been doing? Just healing people? What's he typically do? He's teaching people. And so these people were hearing the words of God from the messenger of God, from the Messiah of God, right? And they're seeing him do incredible things, healing. And Jesus says, you know, they've been here a long time. They've had nothing to eat. They're getting hungry. I can hear their bellies rumbling, maybe like yours today. Look at this. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. And his disciples answered, where can we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? Do you feel like you've heard this story before? Anybody? You know, in French, there's a term, we call that what? Déjà vu, where you feel like you've been there before. Of course, the French language is not fully developed, so they wouldn't call it déjà vu, but they get the idea. Like, Jackie, are you just repeating the story? No, this is a separate story. It's a separate account. It's very similar, but it's different. The first account, 5,000 plus Jews. This account, we're going to see 4,000 plus Gentiles. First account, different food starter, Happy Meal pack or whatever they start with, right? And then second one, little different. And we're going to see that in just a second. But here's my question. What had the disciples already seen Jesus do with very little food? Give it to 5,000 plus. You would think that they go, Jesus, we kind of wondered where we're going to get food to feed the crowd, but like, you could make it. But they don't say that. They don't say that. So Jesus asked this, verse 34. How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. And he told the crowd to sit down on the ground, and then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. Again, we've seen this kind of thing happen, right? And now we're seeing all these people begin to eat from this small meal that would have been one person's meal. Similar event, not the same event. Different numbers they start with the Happy Meal food that they start with. And now the same outcome. Look at verse 37. They all ate and were, help me, what? Satisfied. In other words, they're not going, boy, that was a nice little finger food. Now I'm really hungry, right? They're going, this is awesome. Man, that was a great meal. And afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. And the numbers of those who ate, here we go, was about 4,000 men. Here we go again. Matthew uses the same concept, besides women and children. Remember before, it was 12 baskets left over. Do you remember? 12 baskets left over. And I gave you my take on that. I think that's because 12 represented the 12 tribes of Israel and likely the 12 apostles, and it gives them food to eat, right? Why 7 here? There's debate among this. We don't know because the text doesn't say. I think one of the interesting things is that the 7, this was something cool as I studied. As you look in Deuteronomy chapter 7 and Acts chapter 13, here's what you find out. Did you know that God actually names 7 nations that God ran out from the promised land through the Jews when he brought them into the promised land? They ran out 7 Gentile nations. Isn't that interesting? Look the text up yourself. It's in your notes. And so this could be referring to now the Gentile nations and the fulfillment of the Gentile nations. See this? The other thing could certainly be the number 7 we know in the scripture many times is referring to the perfection of God or the completion of stuff that he does. And here's what I think. I think now we've got Jesus providing for the nations, the tribes of Israel, and also providing for Gentiles in their fullness. How cool is this? The Jewish Messiah providing for all people. Matter of fact, one of your discussion questions I hope you'll use with your family or with your small group, the discussion question basically asks this: how did Jesus fulfill passages from Genesis? And gave you a couple passages to look at in doing this. And I hope I won't give it up. You can check that on your own. Either way, here's what's happened. Jesus has demonstrated he is the Jewish Messiah. who's come to feed the hungry souls of both Jews and Gentiles. In short, here it is. Watch this. God provides. God provides. I love what John Beck says, a commentator I read from this a couple of weeks ago. Here's what he says. I love this. He says, the geography of forgiveness extended to every shoreline. Isn't that cool? It wasn't just for Jews, y'all. In this case, we actually see Jesus taking his message to Gentiles, people like you and me if we're not Jewish. How cool is that? But while we see God provide, we also see this reality that Satan lies. You're going, Jackie, where's that in the text? We're about to see it. We're about to see it. Because we're going to see those religious leaders, the ones who should have recognized Jesus as their Messiah first. Instead, they do what they did so many times, and they stiff-arm Jesus. And they try to pull others away from him. They treat Jesus as their enemy. Look at verse 39. And after Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got into the boat and he went to the city of Magadan. Magadan, by the way, we're not sure where that is. A lot of scholars think, and I think they're right, they think this is a variant spelling of Magdala. Magdala is where Mary of Magdala was from. Mary, we call her Mary Magdalene. That's where that comes from. Those who went to Israel last time, and if you want to go again with me in February 25, if there's no war going on, come with me. But we made our way to this place. We went to Magdala. In 2009, there was an archaeological find in 2009 where they have discovered and dug up a first century synagogue that Jesus likely taught in. It was awesome. We got to see it. So this is likely where they're headed to. Chapter 16, verse 1. And the Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and they tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. Now this is really interesting because it wasn't until we back up way back to Matthew chapter 3 that we see the Pharisees and Sadducees mentioned together. The Pharisees and Sadducees were not buddy-buddy. Think of it like this. It's sort of like Democrats and Republicans in Congress, right? They get along well? Not typically, right? Are there ever times that they work well together? Yeah, you know when it happens? Like when war and stuff like that breaks out. Because suddenly, watch this, that old phrase, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And this is what happens. And here we've got the Pharisees and Sadducees that were part of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court of the day. But they didn't enjoy being around together. They had very different views on who God was and some of the things he had said. And so but watch this. Now suddenly we see them together. The last time we saw them together in Matthew is when they show up to John the Baptist and they got questions for John the Baptist and they're willing to come even together because they don't like John the Baptist either. And so now they're drawing the battle lines as they come and talk with Jesus. And Scripture says they tested Jesus and they asked him for a sign from heaven. Let me ask you a question. Has Jesus not performed enough signs? What have they seen him do? They have seen him specifically. Remember on Sabbath, they had seen him one time when they asked, hey, is it okay to heal this guy when the guy's got the drawn up hand? Do you remember that? And Jesus is like, yes. And the guy's hand goes back to normal. They watched that. Remember that? They've seen Jesus heal. They've seen blind people now be able to see. They've seen these things happen over and over and over and over again. And instead of going, wow, look at the power of God casting out demons, they go, he must be the leader of demons. That's why he casts out demons. Remember that? Wow. Here's the reality, y'all. Matthew chapter 12, verse 14 says, the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. That had already happened back in chapter 12. They aren't looking for a real sign. What they want is they want Jesus to do something that he gets tripped up pretty soon because they're out for blood. Nothing's going to change their mind. And by the way, here's where this comes in. Here's the significance of this. While God so wonderfully provides, and people are going, everything he does well. And then you've got these other people, and they're going, everything he does is from hell. It's not of God. Somebody's wrong. I would submit to you that the picture clearly is that Jesus provides in incredible ways. God provides through Jesus, and Satan absolutely lies, so that these men who should have recognized their Messiah, instead, they seem to be blinded to the truth. Paul writes about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Here's what he says. The God of this age, he's not talking about the one true God. He's talking about somebody who has authority over people, okay? He's talking about the devil. He said, the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel. That's the good news of Jesus, that displays the glory of Christ, Jesus the Messiah, who is the image of God. And so you might go, Jackie, I don't see Satan in this text. I see Satan all throughout this text. Because what's happened is he has blinded the eyes of these guys. They should have been the first ones to see Jesus and go, that's the Messiah. And they are so blinded, they think he's of the devil. Are you kidding me? And so they tested Jesus. By the way that they tested Jesus is the same term that's used earlier in Matthew 4 when Satan tempted Jesus. Tempted, tested, it's dependent on the translator. It's the same Greek term. I think it's the same concept. Remember when Satan goes, hey, if you're really the Messiah, do this sign. Turn the rock into bread. Remember that? Like, show us another one, Jesus. And Jesus won't bite on it. He is not going to be their go-to magician for the day. He refuses. And here's what happens, verse 2. And he replied, when evening comes, you says it'll be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today, it will be stormy because the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. You know, Jesus basically says you are a lot better weathermen than you are theologians. You're a lot better at determining the weather than recognizing the signs that the Messiah stands in your midst. And then he says this really kind, nice phrase, because Jesus never judges. He says, a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign. Who do you think he's talking to? Pharisees and Sadducees, isn't he? And the first thing he calls them is wicked. Do you think religious leaders in our day, they'd appreciate if somebody came up and said, you're wicked? Here's what that means. That means you're full of sin. How about this? You're adulterous. What would that mean to a religious leader? That means you're cheating on the one true God and you got another God on the side. That's what Jesus says about them. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of Jonah. And Jesus then left them and went away. What's the sign of Jonah? We saw Jesus use the same phrase about the same concept in Matthew chapter 12. The sign of Jonah? Well, they all knew the story of Jonah, right? You've got the prophet who didn't want to go to Nineveh. He doesn't want to go to his enemies and warn them of God's wrath, and because he knows that if they respond to that, they're going to repent, and he knows the heart of God, that God will forgive even the enemies of Israel, because it's kind of interesting, isn't it, right? And now in the midst of Hamas and such, that God would absolutely forgive them if they would repent. Remember that? But they know something else about the story of Jonah, and here's what it was. That way before Jonah ever got to Nineveh, something significant happened. He gets swallowed by a big fish, remember? He's stuck in the big fish for 3 days, and then he gets spewed out and probably smelled like, ugh, you know? And they know this story, and here's what Jesus gives. I'm convinced this is what Jesus is saying. He's putting in symbology that they're not going to understand. And he's saying this, you know, the last sign I'm going to do for you, here's what it is. It's going to be like Jonah. What is it? He's going to die, be buried, and what? Raise again. As Jonah came out from a place that looked sure enough like death in that fish and smelled like it, right? That Jesus comes back from the dead, and that will be the sign. And that's going to convince them all, right? No. It does convince some. I don't know which ones, but Acts says that there were many Pharisees who put their trust in Jesus. So that's cool. Maybe some of these, I don't know for sure. And then Jesus and his disciples get back into the boat, according to Mark chapter 8, verse 13, and they head towards a place. They're going to make a turn next week. I hope you'll be here next week. We're going to see Jesus take his disciples into a place called Caesarea Philippi, very Gentile. It's going to be really, really cool. Hope you'll be here for that. And they make their way likely to Capernaum. We don't know for sure, but look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 5. And when they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said to them, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they discussed among themselves. So now you got the disciples. Jesus goes, hey guys, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And then they begin to discuss. Did he say that because we didn't bring any bread? Huh. And by the way, if he didn't bring any bread, does that mean they're going to go hungry? Is that what that means? No, you're talking to the guy that they've now twice seen him do what? Feed thousands with a Happy Meal, right? That's the deal. Look at verse 8. And aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? That would be 12, right? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? That'd be 7, right? You know what Jesus is saying? He's going, do you really think I couldn't provide food for you? Is that what you think? Come on now. And many of us, we could go, yeah, I can't believe they think that way. Let me ask you this. How quickly do we forget God's provision in our lives? You ever had that moment? God's provided for you over and over and over and over and over and over again, and you have a moment where it really gets tough and you're like, I don't know if God's going to provide. You've never done that. I have. So I know you never have. Let me give you an example. You ever taken an inventory of all the times God's provided for you? Let me give you an example. How many meals have you eaten in your life? And yet, here's what happens. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of spoonfuls and handfuls or whatever, right, go down our throat, and we don't many times even think about it and recognize God has provided one more time for me. You know, when you start to appreciate that more, that one time that's not provided in the time you want it to be provided. Isn't that right? How about this? How many times has God healed you of an illness? And I don't mean you just qualify it as something like cancer and God healed me of that, right? That's awesome. How about this? How many times has God healed you of a cold? You know, back in the day, like colds have killed people, right? You get it, right? How many times have you cut yourself? You're like, yeah, it's going to heal up, no problem, right? You know, there are 18 different processes your body goes through in order to heal that up so that your blood doesn't flow out of your body. You bleed out if those 18 different processes didn't happen in the way it should happen. Is that amazing? Next time you cut yourself and it heals up, you're like, thank you, Lord, that I didn't bleed out, right? But no, we just take it for granted, right? How about this? How many times has God clothed you? Jackie walked in the closet today and said, I don't have anything to wear, right? Big fat lie, guys. You got a lot to wear. I know that was you. How about this? How many friends has God put in your life? How many times when you're going through it, God put that friend in your life to serve you and care for you and check on you and love you? Here's a big one. How many sins has God forgiven you for? Wowzers. How many sins has God forgiven you for? How many tough times has God walked with you through? Lastly, how many times has God spoken to you from the scriptures or through his people or answered your prayers? It's easy to take that for granted, isn't it? It's easy for us to go, I can't believe you guys are worried about food and Jesus just fed thousands of people in front of you. I can't believe that you forgot how God provides. Isn't that right? Here's what I want to challenge you to do this week. We're almost done. I want to challenge you to do this. To take some time to actually write down the ways that God has provided for you. And you might go, Jackie, I can't write down all the meals I've ever eaten. I get it. Track what you've eaten in the last week and look at that and go, wow, God's provided. Write down some of the names of some of the friends that God's put in your life to care for you in the difficult days. You might want to use maybe a code word for this one. Why don't you write down some of the sins God's forgiven you for, right? Write down some of the illnesses that God has healed you of. Man, this could be you might need a book, right? You write a book. You don't have to do that, but I do want you to pause. Would you pause this week and go, God, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. God provides for me. And yet Jesus wants not only his disciples to remember, don't you remember what I did for the 4,000, the 5,000? You were there, you're a part of it, you helped serve people. Don't you remember that God provides? He also wants them to remember that Satan lies. And that's why what Jesus says next is so significant. He wants his disciples to understand. He warns them a second time what he's already warned them about. Verse 11. How is it that you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread, but be on your guard, here it is again, against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? What's that referred to? Yeast. Jesus is using this imagery that yeast is something that you put it in the bread, right? And it puffs the bread up. You've got Pharisees and Sadducees that are prideful. They're arrogant. They're not responding to Jesus. And they're teaching people a bunch of stuff that doesn't point them to the one true God. It turns them away from the one true God. And he says, beware of that. And they're teaching. And then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in the bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And you know what we're going to see next week? Again, I hope you'll join us next week. We're going to see for the very first time in Matthew that Jesus is going to talk about something his disciples had never even considered it to be an option, and that is this: the Messiah of God dying. We're going to see Jesus mention that for the first time next week. And here's the reality: that pump is primed, that clock is now ticking. Jesus knows that he has enemies, and he's come on the earth to do more than just teach and heal. He's come to make a payment that all of us need and none of us could pay. Watch this: that he would ultimately provide forgiveness for us through his payment on the cross. And in the midst of that, the enemy will continue to tell you that you and I can be good enough. Our good can outweigh our bad. We don't need God's forgiveness. We can be our own God. And it's a lie. And so here's where we end. I want to ask you a question. I want to tell you a story. And we're going to see a quick video in just a second. We're done. If you could go back and do it all over again, if you could hit the brakes right now where you're at and back the truck up and go do it all over again, would you go trust God who provides? Or would you continue to give in to Satan's lies? Man, there would be a lot of heartache taken away from a lot of our lives, wouldn't there? If we back up and say, you know what, God, I'm going to trust that you're going to provide my future mate for me. And I don't have to mess around with somebody else beforehand. I'll wait on your provision in your way. Isn't that right? We could back up that truck and say, I'm not going to be involved in some of the stuff I was involved with stealing stuff or treating people like garbage or, cheating through stuff. I would go back and I say, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to honor you with my life instead of giving into the short, the short temporal excitement. I'm going to do it your way instead of doing it my way. Isn't that true? And I wonder if some of us in here today are those people. I'm sure some of you are, that we're the people we're going, I am so grateful. I still have, junk from my past, memories I can't get away from, but I know that I'm forgiven. I know that I've trusted Jesus and that stuff's paid for. It's over with. I don't want to live in that anymore. But I wonder how many of us, we still feel guilt and shame. If you still feel guilt and shame and you've genuinely turned from that sin and turned to Jesus, you need to know that guilt and shame doesn't come from the one true God. It comes from the enemy. Here's the other side of that, though. If you still live in that sin and there's guilt and shame, there might be a reason. It might be because you're guilty and what you're doing is shameful. And here's the good news. You can be forgiven for that. You can be forgiven for that. Let me tell you this quick story. It's about a fairly new friend of mine. You ever met somebody that you haven't been around much, but you feel like he's a brother, right? This is for my friend Terry. This is his daughter. I'll tell you about her in a second. I've actually told you part of his story, but here's the rest of the story. Terry works for ADT. Our ADT system messed up a while back. Terry came to my house. He came to my house and didn't have the peace that he was supposed to have that I was told that he had. So it led to 2 face-to-face with Terry Durden out of Crawfordville. Terry and I began to talk, and you might not believe this, but I looked at Terry at one point. I said, Terry, let me just tell you something. I think that you're valuable, made in the image of God. Terry began to respond. Terry's big, old, burly, strong guy. Found out that Terry has been involved infantry in the Army. He's been on several tours of duty. And he begins to tell me this. He begins to say, Jackie, God doesn't care about me. He doesn't want me after everything that I've done, especially in war, evidently. I begin to say, Terry, what if the reason why you showed up today without the equipment that we needed to install was bigger than just an ADT guy coming to somebody's house? What if this is the opportunity for you to hear the good news of Jesus, who's God who provides for you and has provided a way of forgiveness for your life? Really cool opportunity. He had to come back a second time. We've had conversation. We had conversation out in front of my garage, and we're talking, and Terry says, Jackie, I hadn't been to church in I don't know how long. He says, my daughter asks me if I'll take her to church, and I don't want to go because I don't want to feel guilty. I'm not a church guy and all this stuff. And again, I share Christ with them. It was a Sunday morning just before our 11 o'clock service several weeks ago that I get a text from Terry. He sends me this. He says, I'm going to church with my daughter. Isn't that cool? So the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I'm coming back on my day off from fishing, amen, and I'm driving back, and I get a phone call from, guess who? Terry. We had a 40-minute conversation. And he begins to tell me, he says, Jackie, I've been going to church every Sunday with my daughter and my wife, my family. And then he tells me this. Jackie, a few weeks ago, I got baptized. He's followed Jesus. He's put his trust in Jesus. A guy who thought that God couldn't forgive him after everything he's done. And then he tells me this. He said, Jackie, my daughter has a Bible. It's got pictures in it. It says, every night I read the Bible to my daughter. And he starts telling me some of the stories he's reading. How cool is that? And listen, that's not just because a pastor talks with an ADT guy. That's any follower of Jesus who sees the opportunity, who takes it. God set that thing up, man. You know what Terry told me on the phone the other day? He's like, man, us meeting, it was not a coincidence. I go, dude, I absolutely agree with you. And here's what I know. Terry's encouraged me more than I've encouraged him. You think I'm excited? I'm crying riding down the road talking to this dude. Get this, because God provides for more than just your food. He provides more than just paying your bills. He provides a way to be forgiven forever and to put families back together. Amen. May it be so. May it be so. If you want to talk further, that would be our great privilege. Our staff, we'd love to talk with you. Our deacons and wives, we'd love to talk with you. Other Christians, would you talk with us? And if you're that person like Terry, you think you've gone too far. No, you haven't. If you're still breathing, there's still hope. You can be forgiven. If you're a follower of Jesus, may we be the ones that take this good news gospel message to others, not just to the people like us. Jesus could have just stayed with the Jews and we would have never heard the gospel message. Isn't that true? Jesus went to people who were different, who he cared about, and he had compassion for them too. May we be those people. Amen? Amen. We're going to pray, show you a video, and we're done. Lord, thank you for the truth of your scripture. I pray that you would use it to just absolutely deal with us at a heart level. Those of us who belong to you, that we would be encouraged and challenged to keep taking your message to people, that we would be encouraged and challenged to keep following you, to believe and trust your provision rather than the enemy's lies. And then, Lord, we pray for those who have not put their trust in you, they are not walking with you, and pray that they would turn from their sin, just like we've had to do. They would turn to you just like we've had to do. And they would say, Jesus, I don't know how, but if you'll forgive me because of your payment for me, then I trust you. I pray that someone would genuinely trust you this week. That's what we ask in your mighty name. Amen.